Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Hank Cisco Show. And don't touch that dial, because that's what Hank would tell you, not to touch that dial. Today, I'm very proud to have a friend of mine, but somebody very special, Rabbi Howard Cove of Beitenu Synagogue.
Yeah.
And how did you come up with that name, Rabbi?
Stan, years ago, I was looking to get another job.
As a rabbi?
Yeah, you're right. And the way we are hired is that a congregation is its own unit. We're not assigned by a greater rabbinic council. Each synagogue is like a little business unto its own. So I was ready to transition out of my first pulpit, and I go out to Cleveland at Shaker Heights. There's a little synagogue there, and I didn't get the offer, but the name of the synagogue was Beitenu. I loved their philosophy, what they did, and years later, when it was time to form my own congregation in Philadelphia, I used the name Beitenu. I thought it really described what a synagogue ultimately should be, which is the feeling of home and familiarity and where people care about each other and support each other. So that's what it is.
But that's a great story.
But I don't want to poke fun, but Jewish, non-Jewish people, even though I put it in English, people have a hard time pronouncing it. So you're not the first.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry I butchered that. I was practicing and practicing and practicing, and I still screwed it up.
It's all right.
So anyhow, it's always interesting. I know a little bit about your family and everything, but I want you to take you back to your childhood days. And how do you go from, a kid playing outside to becoming a rabbi? Whether it's a rabbi, priest, or anything else like that, there's a journey you have to go through from a mental standpoint. So tell me about your family and the traditions and everything else that kind of brought this to the fore for you.
Yeah, my brother and I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia, first near Nabisco, which is no more.
Right.
And then we moved from there to my parents' dream, Oxford Circle, like Levick and Castor. Mm-hmm. And from the time I was 4 or 5 years old, my parents, even though they had very little money, they always had a few bucks to be part of a synagogue. And my mom and dad were always involved, whether it was in the choir, the PTA. They never contributed a lot of money, but their spirit and their hard work helped build a synagogue. And they were always engaged. That was my second home. And so seeing how my parents lived it, we were not like religious necessarily, like we didn't necessarily keep the dietary laws. Shabbat, the Sabbath, sometimes my dad had to work at his job, but there was always a very strong feeling, a strong identity with Judaism, with Israel. I remember as a kid, it was 1967, I was 8 years old, on a Friday night. Jews never ask for money. Rabbis and synagogue leaders will never ask for donations on a Sabbath, on a holy day. But Israel had just been attacked by the Arabs in 1967, June of 67, and they were not only asking for money, they were asking for blood. I remember that Sunday, my parents went to the synagogue and donated blood that was shipped over to Israel to help wounded soldiers. And so there was always this just, strong identification. One other thing, Stan, every holiday was a time for family, whether it was at my parents, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles. We got together multiple times a month for Sabbath dinner or for holiday dinners. And that was also something that brought us together.
The interesting thing, and although I have in school I loved history, and the history of the Jewish people is very interesting, to say the least. I mean, for probably the smallest group of people in the world, I think they're less than 0.001% of the total population of the world.
13, 14 million at best, yeah, in the world.
They've had probably from, when you think of the Torah, and you think of the Bible, the Old and New Testament, and you think of the Quran, and you think of Buddhism and everything else like that, the three religions that come together are Judaism, Christianity, and the Muslim faith. And they all seem to be based on these traditions that go back to Judaism. I think there's a story about Abraham and his two sons, and I know that's reflected in the separation of Judaism and the Muslim faith to a degree. But the traditions, it's not only the religious aspect of it, but is this steep tradition that exists in Judaism, the family stuff. It's almost like an Italian family without the spaghetti and meatballs, you know, that type of thing.
We have matzo balls.
We have matzo, it's close, all right. But anyhow, how did that tradition affect you? How was that, you know, put in front of you, and how did you accept that?
I embraced it totally. My parents, you know, we had to go to Hebrew school. It was incumbent on both my brother and I to have a bar mitzvah, but after that, it was up to us, our choice, whether to go on to what's called confirmation, which is from age 13 to 16. My brother chose not to, I did, and you know, I enjoyed learning Jewish history and Israel and Jewish ethics and the Holocaust and all of these aspects of Jewish peoplehood. You know, Stan, one of the things that I didn't appreciate when I was a kid, but later on in rabbinical school, is that one of the differences between Islam and between Christianity and then you have Judaism, you know, what I appreciate is that Judaism is more than a religion. It's a way of life. It's a civilization. We have a culture. We have a land. We have Israel. We have peoplehood. We have a religion. God is part of the civilization. And for me, I think what I gravitated to as a younger person was peoplehood, was Israel, was our culture. And as I got older and I started studying the text, the faith and religion began to play a bigger part. But as a rabbi, when I come across, you know, Jewish people searching, looking for a connection, I understand that it's not always going to be through God and Torah and religion. I have to, in creating a congregation, a community, be able to offer all kinds of points of connection in order to, you know, get the attention of Jewish adults.
I would assume that that a lot of people are drawn just from the traditions that exist in the family, the Passover, Yom Kippur, things of that, the two largest holidays. And I know there's Purim and there's other.
Well, we have holidays through the year.
Through the years, but those two being the key. They're, you know, almost every Jewish person that I've ever met, whether they're really committed Jews and go to the synagogue every Sabbath, or they're not, they will do Yom Kippur. They do participate in Yom. They will definitely show up in the synagogue on Yom Kippur.
And thank God. You know, there are certain colleagues of mine that are very cynical, that you know, lament the fact that, you know, we see a lot of Jewish adults only on the holidays. But it's like that homing pigeon. Thank God that these Jewish people still feel that calling to come together for the high holidays, for Rosh Hashanah.
Even if it's only once a year.
Listen, I'll hug you and embrace you. If I only see you once a year, you know, that's great. I'm glad to see you, and I'll make you feel as comfortable as I can. But the point that I try to explain somewhere along Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to my congregants is that if you only come these 2 days, and I think you'll find meaning and great messages, that you don't give yourself the opportunity to see the gamut of Jewish celebration. We Jews, we're known for our chutzpah. We're known for our animation. And You mentioned
Hold on a
Purim.
minute. Hold on a minute.
Yes.
There's a lot of Italians that will argue with you on the animation part.
Right,
Me
right.
being one of them.
Right,
But
well,
we
we-
occupied Israel for about 200 years, so we
Well,
got a lot of animation in
We,
this.
we have a lot of cultural similarities, but the point is that we have holidays that celebrate nature, that celebrate our survival, that just celebrate life. And we have the very serious holy days where we're really into self-examination and self-improvement, and it is a time of introspection, and it is serious work. But then you have other holidays and festivals that just celebrate life. And, and I wish people would give themselves the gift of that time to see that, Judaism can help them express all kinds of emotions.
One of the things that's always struck me, and as you know, I've interviewed priests and monsignors and everything else like that, and I had a cousin that got through 3 years of the seminary, and then in the last year he decided it wasn't for him. What I wanted to find out from you, because there's a lot of young people that watch this show too, you're in your path. When did you kind of get this thing that you're going to wind up being a rabbi?
I wanted to become an elementary school teacher, which I did from Temple University.
What made you choose
back in
that as a teacher?
So again, when I look back, I say that God put some of these wonderful people in my path, and one happened to be my Uncle Jerry, who's still alive. He's a retired Philadelphia school teacher, and he invited me on several years in a row when I was maybe in my early teens. I might have been middle school, early high school, and he would invite me to the end of the year just to watch him teach. And I was mesmerized. I was like, I want to do this. I saw him in front of a group of 30 children, and then he led assemblies, and I saw him in front of 300-400 people, and mostly children. And he was funny, he was amusing, he was informing. And I want to do this. I want to affect kids' lives. And so I got my degree in education. I got a start. I worked in some synagogues doing early childhood education and youth work. And then those people, those adults in the synagogue, they saw me, and they saw my enthusiasm, my spirit. They saw how, relationships were important to me. And they said, you should be a rabbi. We need rabbis like you. And honestly, I didn't think I had the intellectual curiosity or the commitment. Rabbinical school is 6 years post undergrad from a college, a university. So it would have meant that I would have gone 10 years learning in a formal setting post high school. And that was a lot of time. And I didn't know if I had the fortitude. And there were times during the 6 years where I kind of doubted whether I was going to be an effective rabbi. And thank God I had some professors who were rabbis themselves.
What created the doubts in your mind? Because even young people, I'm sure, when they're going, even people that are in business today and things like that have doubts sometimes. I often say that there's intersections in our lives. There's these patterns, these paths, multi-level paths. The theorists today talk about the alternate universe and things of that nature. So if you choose one path, they go off one way, choose another path. So you had your uncle, and that was a path. That was a path that you decided to take to go into teaching. Now you're there with these doubts and everything else. You're at this path, this critical path. You could have gone either way. What were some of the doubts, and how did you resolve them to a degree?
So in my world, the smartest people I knew were rabbis. And they were wise, they were smart, they were disciplined, and I was trying to stack myself up intellectually, spiritually to these men, and they were all men, and I, was wondering, maybe I'm, fooling myself. And again, I went to a professor, a rabbi, at the rabbinical school after my first year. And it's interesting, his name was Rabbi Ivan Kane, Society Hill Synagogue. He was the pulpit rabbi, and he also taught Bible to us. And he drew a bell-shaped curve. And he said, Howard, your colleagues, as I've gotten to know them, they're going to be here at the bottom of the curve. What I know of you and your background and the answers I've heard from you, you're going to be at the top of the curve. The kinds of rabbis that synagogues need today, what you have is going to be in great demand. And Stan, don't you know it? I got a job before every single one of my colleagues who graduated Yale, who went on to write PhDs. And I just had my little degree from Temple University in elementary education. And 35 years later, I'm having a pretty damn good career.
And
Excuse me.
well, you're saying it's a pretty good career, but it's a career that's really is something much more than just a career.
Yeah, it's
an
calling.
avocation, vocation.
Yep.
It's a whole way of being to a degree.
Yeah.
Because one thing I know about you and your family in general, and knowing your brother and everything else like that, you have always been an extremely giving person, much like your dad was, much like your mom was. I mean, you were committed to people.
Yeah.
You really were. And there was no pretense about it. When people deal with you, you're genuinely in their space. A lot of times you go talk to people and you want something from them, you never feel that you ever get into their space. They're just talking to talk to you, and they're giving you things by rote that are up here. But I think what has set the relationship with us is that we could not see each other for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and sit down and have an hour conversation about everything. And it's like we left off, we start talking right where we left off.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that's, and I've seen you with other people, and you're that way. I mean, you are totally immersed in that person's being, and you want to be there for them as a true friend. So you come across a little bit differently than a lot of people. There's no pretense, no holier than thou with your demeanor.
You know what? My parents, we did grow up in a pretty homogeneous community, but my parents had friends who were Jewish, non-Jewish, they were African American, they were white. I learned through the course of my childhood, and then, I told you that I had a little experience. It was over a period of years, but maybe it was an hour a week. I, as a rabbi, went to teach at Conwell Egan Catholic up in Levittown. And that's very interesting. So you get a call one day, again, paths crossed, something happens, and you choose it. Yeah.
So you get a call out of the blue. You weren't expecting anything else.
No.
It says, hey, we were looking at you, and we thought you'd be great. We have this program that was Steven Spielberg. Tell me about that.
Yeah. The movie maker, Steven Spielberg. I understand that as a child growing up in Middle America, he, as a Jewish guy, a Jewish kid, he really was the recipient of a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of hurtful things said to him. And, as a successful human being, he wants to try to make a difference in the world.
You want to break that down.
So through his foundation, he set up these programs in major cities around the country where his foundation placed a rabbi in a Catholic high school and a priest in a Jewish high school. And the idea was for children, high school kids, to be able to ask questions and to dialogue and to become familiar with the other faith through a worthy representative of that faith. And back to your question, about my approach to human beings, in need or, just want to interact with me. From that experience at Conwell-Egan, besides what I might have taught those people, the students, the nuns, the priests, the lay teachers, they taught me. They taught me that we're all humans, that we all are driven by a lot of the same drives and motivated by a lot of the same things, that we want love, we want meaning, we want friendship. I think a lot of us want, to try to figure out where God and spirituality fits into our lives. And we're on a path. We just might have different ways to get to the destination and different language, but we all have a soul, and we all need to develop that soul.
One of the things that's missing so much, I find, especially right now, everybody seems to be yelling at each other and no one seems to be listening. So, you can't do something. My father used to say, you can't be angry and think at the same time. So
He's very wise.
Yes, and he was always one that drove you to thinking. But that seems to be a really, really big issue today. And I know breaking down those barriers, having people listen, having conversations with people to understand, because at the end of the day, I often tell people when we discuss religion, which some comes up, and I've been in many, many different settings as you have been, and I said, what gets me more than anything is, whether you're Jew, Islam, Buddha, Catholic, Christian, Protestant, whatever you are, when you think about how many people have been killed in the name of God and Jesus Christ and Muhammad and everything else, it drives me wild. Because here I'm thinking that if we believe in a God, why would a God want human beings to perform the most obscene thing that an animal can do, to kill another person, which is the lowest form of human life, in his name or her name, whatever you believe in?
Okay.
Why would he do that or she do that? It just, to me, it's impossible to even conceive
It's a human perversion, and it's a total misrepresentation of God. If I thought for a minute that God advocated slaying other people because other people didn't believe the Jewish view of God, if I felt for a minute that God punished gays and lesbians, for their, lifestyle, if I thought for a minute that God brought on all kinds of natural disasters because a particular city was sinful, I would never have chosen to be a rabbi. I wouldn't be a rabbi today, because I would think this is not, this is not what I want to represent. I think God cries when humans choose to destroy and kill and make excuses for God. That's I agree.
We see this the space station that circles the planet, our planet, and people are sent up there for months at a time, and they exist, they coexist. But actually the Earth is nothing more than a space station traveling 1 billion miles an hour through this darkness of space, and we're all on this planet together. It would be interesting if we could all become that space station in the sky. We have something, I found out something. We were both involved with the Golden Slipper Camp, and I was on the board years ago in the late 70s and everything else, which is a camp for underprivileged children up in the Poconos, way up in the Poconos.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
I didn't realize all these years I've known you. I didn't realize. I haven't been up to the camp in a couple years, but I know when I was a camper there, when I was a counselor there, I'd gone back maybe 5-10 years. You and your colleagues did an amazing job creating this environment in the Poconos. It was clean, it was warm, it was a family. I came from a loving family, but to be embraced, by Dave Werther. He was the director back then, but to know that all these philanthropic adults were donating tons of money, food, their time.
The time was really...
to create this for us kids that our parents didn't have 2 cents to rub together. I remember my parents, registered us. It was under $100 a week. Camp today is $5,000 to $10,000 a summer, and you guys all did that.
It was
so
really good.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
We also experienced it because, as board members, we were given a weekend, and we brought our kids up there.
Right.
And we slept in the bunks, and we slept out there, and the whole thing. And we did everything the kids do, fishing for fish in the thing. We had all the different things, and it was really a great experience for them. And all the kids that I ever met up there really enjoyed it. There's a couple funny stories, but we won't get into it now because they're really crazy. But anyhow, so we had that golden slipper moment.
But I was in college back then when I was a counselor, and Dave put me in charge of Saturday morning worship. I had some experience.
Somebody saw it that would happen.
He knew I knew a few prayers, and so.
But the interesting thing about to the viewers, interesting thing about Rabbi Cove is your Beiteno.
You did better.
Beiteno,
That was better.
Is really a very unique experience for people, because you've always reached out to a lot of different groups. I know you've actually did instructions at a mosque, and you've done that. You yourself have tried to follow that Steven Spielberg a concept of breaking down the static that exists in front of people, that they just can't see the humanity in another person. And that goes, in my mind, in everything that we do. If we could just, take away race, religion, all the things, class and everything else, and just see the humanity in people, your whole aspect of looking at that person is entirely different. But these shields go up, these barriers that we have. But I know your philosophy is to break that down. So how do you get involved with Islam? How do you get involved with these other religions, and how do you bring these people together?
It was 2002, 2003. Some time had passed after 9/11, and realizing that the Muslim community all over the country was really, being harshly attacked for what was perpetrated by the Saudis and other people, the terrorists. And it was around this time of year, and there was a mosque in Yardley where I was a pulpit rabbi, and I literally knocked on their door. I introduced myself, and the gentleman that I met that day, he's still a friend of mine. His name is Hasib Abdul Rahman. And he wasn't a religious leader. He was a volunteer who he happened to be on. He headed the committee for community outreach, right? And so Hasib and I have a conversation. I said, Hasib, we have a synagogue Seder coming up in a couple weeks. I'd love you to bring some members of the mosque. Sure enough, that year and for the next 4 or 5 years, Hasib fills a whole table, and even the Imam Shebli, comes. And at that Seder was also my friend Bob Kuhn from Yardley United Methodist Church. And we truly, each of us as religious leaders, we spoke about different aspects of the Seder. Whether I found out Moses, the Moses that led our ancestors out of Egypt, he's mentioned in the Quran more times than is Muhammad. Who knew? And
I assume that he's mentioned in a positive.
Yeah, he's considered one of the prophets that came before. It was Moses and Jesus, and then Muhammad. They feel that Muhammad is in the line of prophecy.
I did hear that Jesus is actually, that Muhammad drew on experience with Jesus.
Absolutely.
In the Quran. So I had heard about that. I did not know about the Moses thing.
Yeah, but it was interesting, because in preparation for the Seder, Chassid tells me, Rabbi, the services, the Seder is going to start around 6. It's one of our prayer times. I said, Chassid, if you have to get up, and leave, we'll set up a place where you can pray in the synagogue. And they did, and they came back. And so after that, I get a call from Imam Chebli. We're having a Feast of Abraham. Oh, okay.
Abraham is pretty big in the Jewish religion.
Would you like to please come and bring your congregation? So a couple months after our Seder, we go to a Feast of Abraham. It's our Abraham. It's the Abraham, the first Jew. Who knew that they celebrate Abraham as an important prophet in the line of Ishmael?
Because Abraham had the 2 sons.
So when I think, like a lot of rabbis, we realize that if we ever get into, if our communities are ever stricken with anti-Semitism, if we ever need the help of others, they have to know us. We have to know them. And, there have been times when synagogues, things have been written on the buildings, swastikas and anti-Jewish sentiment, and the interfaith communities have come to each other's aid and to our aid, and it's been reassuring. And while we see, a rise of anti-Semitism, and we see this mosque, sadly, in New Zealand being attacked, I know that the majority of people associated with, religious institutions across the spectrum, we're good people. And we want to know each other. We want to recognize each other's humanity and learn from each other.
Interestingly enough, though, when you think about it, the billions of people who believe in Islam, it only takes a very small percentage of those people to create havoc throughout the religion. So when we have these things that are going off in Israel, just the other day, the missiles that are going off, that becomes extremely frustrating because it's a very small population who for their own reasons just want to hate for the sake of hating to a degree. We're going to be wrapping up.
Can I just say,
Yes.
Stan, in any response to hatred, to violence, no matter who it's struck against, the bottom line is we have an expression: for evil to promote itself or to rise in its effect, it only takes the good people to remain silent, to do nothing. And as long as the good people in any faith, in any religious community, choose to stay silent and put their, sit on their hands, then evil under any guise is going to flourish because nobody's going to push back.
That is so true, because you think and we talk about path, when you think in terms of all these different paths human beings could have taken, sometimes we've chosen to sit on our hands and not accept certain things as they were, and that got us in trouble. One of the things that I know, and I'm going to ask you this question, I don't know if you know the answer to it. I am sure that I know there's some prayers that are both in the Catholic and Christian faith that are similar in the Jewish faith, that they're almost word for word. I'm sure there are some prayers in Islam, in the Quran, that pretty much, given the fact that the Quran's based on the other 3 books, I'm sure there's got to be at least one prayer that pretty much, if you're Islam, if you're a Muslim, if you're a Catholic or Christian or Jewish, you could say this prayer and everybody would know it. Are you familiar with any prayers like that?
Well, I know one that comes to mind, and I do interfaith weddings, and oftentimes I suggest to the bride and groom that maybe with their minister or priest, he or she and I can bless the couple with a blessing that comes out of the priestly tradition. At the end of a sacrificial, service, the priest would make a sign like this, Now, if you're familiar with Star Trek, Leonard Nimoy was the actor who played Spock.
Right.
He was a Jewish actor
right.
who,
Oh, is that where that came
right?
from?
So the sign of the Vulcan, and it's a true story, he reflected back on when he was a kid in synagogue, the Kohen, a religious leader in the synagogue, would make this sign. And that's where Leonard Nimoy got it. But so this is the sign of the letter Shin in Hebrew, and the priest would put the sign up, and he would say the following. And I'll do it. Should I do it in Hebrew and English, or
Yeah,
just
do it in Hebrew and English.
So in Hebrew, it's Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, which means may God bless you and keep you strong. The next verse is Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka, which means may God's countenance, God's light, shine upon you and be gracious to you. And may I add, when I'm blessing a couple, I say, may that same light shine from your souls upon each other. And then I finish with Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom, and may God grant you the gift of peace, of shalom, of contentment, of good health. Amen.
Well, I got to tell you, that's a great way to end this program. And Rabbi, it has been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for asking me, Stan.
There's so much more I wanted to ask you. You have
I'll
no
come
idea.
back.
Just remember one thing. Just like a turtle, he doesn't go anywhere unless he sticks his neck out. So make sure if you want to go after something, you got to stick your neck out. See you next week. Thanks for tuning in.